Is your baitcaster not casting as far as it used to? Maybe you've already tried oiling the bearings, but it didn't really help. Most of the time, the problem isn't the reel, it's likely just dirty bearings. This reel has been abused and the spool is not spinning very well anymore. You can see that the tension is all the way off on it pretty much. There's no brakes currently applied and the spool just doesn't spin very well anymore. And it likely just has dirty bearings. We're going to clean those up. But today I'm going to show you how to clean the bearings and bring your casting distance back. So there's 3 bearings typically in a reel that are related to the spool. There's one inside the side panel. There's one on the spool. And there's one under the tension knob. We're going to pull all 3 of these out and we're going to clean them and see if we can bring this reel back to life. So here's a close-up of those bearings. There's your spool bearing. We'll take that out in a minute. There is a bearing underneath this centrifugal brake, and we'll take that off and I'll show you that in a moment. And then we have this bearing right here. And these small bearings, they control how freely your spool spins. When they're clean, the spool spins easily and you get longer casts. When they're dirty, the spool slows down. That means shorter cast, harder casting, and sometimes even more backlashes. So what are the signs that your bearings need cleaning? Typically your casting distance drops, your spool doesn't spin as freely as it used to, the reel starts sounding louder during casts, and maybe it even feels kind of rough when you spin the spool. If you notice any of these, cleaning these bearings can make a huge difference. All right, so to perform the work that we're going to do today, you need a small container like this to put your solvent in, and I'm using acetone, pure acetone. You could also use isopropyl alcohol and some other things, but these are the 2 that I would recommend, acetone or isopropyl alcohol. You will need a spool bearing removal tool. You can probably remove it other ways, but this is the easiest way to do it, is using this tool. And you typically need a pair of tweezers or something small to pop out the retaining clips. There's a retaining clip underneath here, and then there's also a retaining clip right here that we have to pop out. You may want to have your reel's disassembly instructions just in case, and then I like to have some paper towels around. And I usually keep everything on this type of like towel or something like that so I don't lose any of the parts. So let's go ahead and get started. I actually need a screwdriver because I have to remove this one screw right here to get to the centrifugal brake off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm just going to pull that off. And I'm going to set it aside here. And in here, you can see this little clip right here. And so we want to remove that clip. And I'm just going to use my tweezers and get under it. And it'll start to pop out like that. And then you can typically take your fingers and just pull it the rest of the way out. And it just looks like that. It's like kind of like a hexagon or a pentagon. I'm just gonna set that down right here. And then we can see our bearing right there. Now, to get your bearing out, you might tap it on the ground like this, see if it'll pop out. I have a tool for that. It's got a little hook on it right here where I can pull it out. But you can also use the end of a Q-tip typically and kind of push it in there to pull it out. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this bearing into our acetone there and let it start soaking. So that's one. Now I'm going to pull the spool bearing off. And this one, like I said, you need this little special tool to get it off. And essentially all you do is line it up with the pin. Right there, and then we're going to push the pin out. And there may be other ways to get this bearing out, but this tool is really the most effective. And it's not an expensive tool, it's about $6 on Amazon. And you don't want to lose that little pin, because we're going to have to put it back on the spool. So I'm going to set it over here as well. And then we're going to pull out our spool bearing. And I'm going to drop it in the acetone as well. So now we have 2 bearings in the acetone. And then we have our third bearing, which is a little bit smaller bearing. And most of the time you can get to this bearing on the outside. Some reels you might have to take it apart, but most reels have a little retaining clip, just like the other one, that you have to pop out. So I'm gonna get my tweezers once again. And I'm gonna get under that retaining clip and pull it out. And see, it's the same sort of like hexagon type retaining clip. And then we're going to pull this bearing out. There it is. And I'm going to drop it in the acetone as well. And I'm going to let these set in this acetone for probably 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to swish them around and get all the gunk out of them. Okay, they've been in here for probably about 15 minutes. I have swirled them around like this a little bit, and it's time to pull them out. It's kind of hard to see, but the acetone has changed color a little bit, so we did get some grime and dirt out of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull them out. There they are. We just let them dry, and the acetone evaporates pretty quickly. And you'll also notice that all 3 bearings are different sizes, and that's typical. The one with the spool is a little bit bigger, and then the one has a little bit bigger inner diameter, and then the one for the tension is a smaller bearing all around, and then this is your other side plate bearing. Anyway, we're going to let them set here and dry for another 10 minutes or so. The acetone evaporates really quickly. The other thing we want to do is we want to clean our spool or our spool shaft very well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to use a clean cloth here. You could use a paper towel. Just get any grime or grit off of that as well. All right, now we're going to oil our bearings and put everything back together and see if it made a difference. I think it probably did. So from an oiling standpoint, the bearings, you want to use just 1 drop of oil. And what I have here is some Ardent Real Butter, and this is the saltwater version. The freshwater version is kind of a yellow color. The saltwater is this blue. Since I fish both salt and fresh, I always used salt. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add 1 drop of oil to each of these bearings. Put it on the outside. Work it around. And then to get that in there, I'm going to spin it around. And like I said, you could do this on a Q-tip or something. I'm using this tool right here. I'm just going to put it on there and kind of spin them. Get that oil in there. All right, now let's put everything back together and see if it made any difference. I'll start with the side panel here. And remember, your bearings are 3 different sizes. So I'm going to drop this one in. And then we have 2 clips as well. And one of those clips is smaller than the other. We have this one, and we also have this one. And so we're going to use the larger one for this. And essentially, to put these clips back in, you can usually just do it with your fingers. You kind of put it in at an angle, and you work it around. That's back in place now. And then we had this brake we need to put back on. And you may or may not have this. You'll have to look at your instructions for whatever reel you're working on. And then we're going to put the spool bearing back on. Slides back down. Remember, we have this pin, so I have to put this pin back in there. So I started to slide it in a little bit, and then we have our tool. Go ahead and push that through. And you can also replace your bearings. If your bearings get to a point where you try to clean them, it doesn't make any difference, you can absolutely buy new bearings. You can buy them from the manufacturer of the reel a lot of times. You can also get a lot of different bearings off Amazon. There we go. And then our final bearing goes right there. And I'm gonna wipe that out because it looks a little grimy. So I'm gonna take my rag and wipe that out. And it definitely did have some old grease in there. All right, so now we're gonna drop our bearing in there. It's back in place. And then we need to put our retaining clip back in. Same sort of thing. Just gonna use my finger and I'm gonna work it in there. Got it in there. All right, let's put this guy back together and see how it does. I'm gonna go ahead and put my spool tension knob back on. We're gonna drop the spool in. And then we're going to go ahead and pop on the side panel. So if you remember, we put on 1 drop of oil. We don't want to put too much because it'll just slow the bearings down, just enough. And then there is a mistake that a lot of people make when they put their reel back together. They forget to reset their tension and potentially even their brakes. So if your baitcaster hasn't been casting like it used to, dirty bearings might be the problem. It's a simple maintenance step that can make a big difference. And it only takes a few minutes, as we just saw. If you want to see the full setup for eliminating backlashes, check out my Baitcaster setup video on the channel.